And by flipping that switch in your mind, later on in life, you will not need external validation or extrinsic motivation in order to accomplish all of your goals, because hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. Today, I'm going to be discussing the differences between extrinsic and intrinsic motivation and why it's important to balance these two out. But before I start, you guys know the drill. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, ding, ding, ding. And if you don't want to watch the entire video, I will be including timestamps in the description so you can skip ahead to the section that you want. Now, onto the topic at hand. A lot of people find it very difficult when it comes to setting goals, and also when they do set goals, they'll have a difficult time following through on those goals to make it a reality. And one of the reasons for this is because of a mismanagement between your extrinsic motivation and your intrinsic motivation. Essentially, extrinsic motivation is going to be an external form of motivation. You can think of this as motivation coming from another person or a reward coming from achieving a specific goal. One example would be, let's say you want to lose weight and you want to lose weight by going to the gym and working out, but you do not enjoy working out. If you have a friend who enjoys working out and they are able to bring you along, motivate you, and they are able to push you to work hard and accomplish your goal, that would be a form of extrinsic motivation, because you are not doing it because you want to do it for yourself, but rather you are doing it because you have a friend who is pulling you along with them in order to accomplish your goal. Whereas intrinsic motivation, this is something that is more internal. This is something that you would achieve from more personal satisfaction. So in the exact same scenario, if it is your goal to lose weight and you want to go to the gym, if you're the type of person where you actually enjoy going to the gym and you enjoy seeing the progress that you make and everything that you've done, then that would be a form of intrinsic motivation because it comes from a sense of personal satisfaction. One of the things with regard to intrinsic and extrinsic motivation is that intrinsic motivation, it can turn into extrinsic motivation. Just one example would be doing something that you actually love, something like a hobby, and then being offered money to do that exact same task. When you are doing something because you truly love it and it is just a hobby, you are doing it for yourself. There is no reward for it. Whereas if somebody offers you money for it, all of a sudden now there is a reward behind it. So all of a sudden you are not solely doing it for the purposes of your own enjoyment, but now you are tying it to this other goal, this specific reward. And one of the reasons that this can be very negative is because if you do get some type of a reward for something that you already enjoy doing, then this can remove some of the pleasure that was originally associated with that hobby or task. I'm going to give an example. My cousin, she ends up baking cakes. She used to do this as a hobby. She never got paid for it. She did it just because she truly enjoyed it. And she would make cakes for her friends. She would do it for weddings, for birthday parties, all that type of stuff. And she got to the point where she got really, really good at it. And then people started offering money for her. So as soon as she started getting money to make these cakes, she started picking up a lot more popularity and doing it a lot more frequently. And now she doesn't do it anymore for fun whatsoever, because now she ends up expecting that reward from baking those cakes. Whereas before, she did it just for herself, just for fun. Now, one of the reasons why this can be very detrimental is because if you do shift your focus from intrinsic motivation to extrinsic motivation, what's going to happen is you are constantly going to need that reward system in order for you to perform that task. That is a classic example. She used to bake cakes just for fun, and now she doesn't bake them for fun at all anymore because there is no money when she bakes it for fun, so she only wants to do it when someone is paying her for it. And one of the reasons why this could be very detrimental is because intrinsic motivation is going to be much more likely to lead to persistent behavioral changes toward a specific goal than extrinsic motivation. So if you shift from intrinsic motivation to extrinsic motivation, you can lose that. And as we get older, it's going to be easier and easier to lose our sense of intrinsic motivation. Children are going to naturally have a sense of intrinsic motivation because when you are a child, you want to explore your environment, you want to discover what abilities you have, and you are doing those just for the sake of yourself. You're not doing it because someone else is telling you to do it, and you're not doing it because there's some type of reward tied into that specific task. You are doing it because you truly want to just explore the world and see what is out there. But even as children, our intrinsic motivation can turn into extrinsic motivation. I'll give an example. Let's say you are a child and you are playing a particular sport, and you're playing that sport because you truly just love that sport and you are doing it for yourself. Well, if you get adulation from a parent, they're telling you how great you are at that sport, then what's going to happen is you might end up feeding off of that adulation, and the only reason you may want to continue to do that in the future is because of the positive feedback that you are getting from the the parent or from a friend. Whereas originally, when you were doing it for yourself, you did not want that positive feedback. You just did it because you enjoyed doing it. So that is one of the ways that intrinsic motivation can turn into extrinsic motivation. And it's going to be very, very important to be able to balance your extrinsic motivation with your intrinsic motivation, because what's going to happen is it is going to make it very, very difficult to engage in undesirable activities, because if you have no type of reward system, then you're not going to want to do things that you do not enjoy. So extrinsic motivation is going to be very important when it comes to engaging in undesirable activities. Whereas with regard to intrinsic motivation, if you have no intrinsic motivation whatsoever, then you're only going to want to engage in activities whenever there is some type of reward for you, because without that reward, there is going to be no reason for you to be able to perform that task. And just a few of the ways that you can create this imbalance between your intrinsic motivation and your extrinsic motivation are going to be through fear and overprotective parenting, non-specific feedback, and also focusing on rewards. With regard to fear and overprotective parents, if you have parents that are very, very overprotective, this is going to signal you to interpret the world as everything is going to be dangerous. You are going to see the world as dangerous and that you should not take risks. And this could lead to very detrimental outcomes later on in life. So one of the reasons why this is going to lead to negative impacts is because with regard to exploring the world, in order to explore the world, you need to take risks, because by exploring, you are going into the unknown. And because it is unknown, there is risk involved with that. And if you do develop the pattern of constantly being afraid to take any risk, what's going to happen is you are going to ignore those internal motivators such as your curiosity. And if you lack any type of curiosity, then you're not really going to have that exploratory feeling. Another thing is going to be non-specific feedback. This may seem a little counterintuitive. You would think, okay, well, any type of positive feedback is going to be beneficial. But if it's not specific, this could actually have the opposite effect that you want it to have. One example is, let's say you have a child or just anybody in general, and you are praising them for how smart or athletic they are. If you're very general with your compliments, just saying, oh, you're so smart, or oh, you're so athletic, then this could have a negative impact, because if somebody has a very general statement like you are so smart, then when it comes to their education, they may feel that they don't need to study, because why would I need to study? I'm so smart. I could just naturally ace this test. Same thing with athletics. If you constantly praise someone for their athletic ability, then they may think, okay, I don't need to practice at this sport because I'm naturally very athletic and I can get away with just my own natural talent. But the truth is, if you offer very specific advice, then that is going to be much more constructive than just giving very broad advice. And one of the reasons for this is because non-specific feedback is going to target factors that may be perceived to be under the person's control. Whereas if you give very specific feedback, what's going to happen is the specific feedback is going to be tied to effects, efforts, and behaviors. Let's say, going back to the example of somebody who is very athletic, rather than just telling somebody you are very athletic, it would be much better to actually give them some motivation by praising them for something specific that they did to be able to accomplish the goal that they accomplished. One example, let's say your child is a basketball player and you notice that they've been working on their jumping and they are jumping much higher. Rather than just saying, oh, you're very athletic, you're very great at sports, it would be much better to say, wow, you know what? I can see that your jumping is getting much better from all of the practicing that you've been doing. Keep it up, because then they are going to associate that positive feedback with the behavior of practicing jumping, and they are going to be much more likely to persist and continue with that specific behavioral pattern because of the praise that they are getting. Now, with regard to focusing on reward, this can also be detrimental with regard to losing a sense of balance between extrinsic and intrinsic motivation, because by focusing solely on rewards, what's going to happen is rewards are often going to be used as a motivator, and this can induce a need for extrinsic motivation. Just one example, going back to the cake scenario, my cousin, when she started baking cakes, she did it just for fun, and then later when she started getting paid for it, she no longer wanted to do it for fun anymore because she needed that money, because she had been receiving it for so long that now doing it for free doesn't make any sense to her. So it's going to be very important that you try to not focus solely on rewards in order to balance out your intrinsic to extrinsic motivation, because if you can improve your intrinsic motivation, it is going to make it much easier for you to set goals and also follow through on your goals. And just a couple of ways of how having too much extrinsic motivation can be problematic is, number one, it's going to create an inability to achieve independent goals, because when you have too much extrinsic motivation, you may be able to achieve goals that are set by others or follow instructions set by other people, but you're going to find it very difficult to set your own goals and do things just for the sake of yourself, because you're going to need that external reward, whether it's praise from an individual or some type of monetary reward. And the second issue is that it is going to create an imbalance between your external and your internal validation. With regard to internal and external validation, external validation is going to be validation coming from somebody else or coming from some other entity, and internal validation is validation that you have on your own. And if you are the type of person where you have too much extrinsic motivation and not enough intrinsic motivation, what's going to happen is you are going to need that approval from that other person. And the truth is, we can't always receive praise. So when there are situations where we can't receive praise, we need to find a way to be able to motivate ourselves. And that is when internal validation and intrinsic motivation is going to come into play. Because if we are unhappy with ourselves when no one else is around to praise us, then we are not going to have a very satisfied and fulfilled life. With regard to internal validation, this is going to be the ability to feel good about ourselves or our efforts without anybody else praising us. So one example, let's say you end up losing weight. If somebody tells you, wow, you know what, you look really great because you lost all of that weight, that would be a form of external validation because you are getting praise from somebody else. Whereas if nobody ends up acknowledging all of the work that you've put in and the work that you've accomplished, if you're still able to look in the mirror and be proud of everything that you've accomplished, that would be a form of internal validation because you don't need to get praise from somebody else. You're able to just look at yourself, see what you've accomplished, and be able to be content with everything that you have done. So that is why internal validation and intrinsic motivation is very important. Now, if you are lacking intrinsic motivation, how exactly can you develop more intrinsic motivation? Well, one is going to be to develop an internal reward system. One of the ways that you can do this is by tying internal rewards to intrinsic motivators. This may seem a little bit confusing, but I'm going to give you an example. Let's say, going back to the weight loss example, you want to lose weight. If you're the type of person where you want to lose weight, but at the same time you hate going to the gym and you just do not want to perform any of those activities, what you can do is take a group class. If you find that being in a group of people is going to motivate you to lose weight, that is going to be a form of extrinsic motivation because you are getting that motivation from those other people. But you can use that motivation to be persistent with your goal of weight loss. And then eventually what's going to happen is once you start to lose more and more weight, you can start to focus on things like how good it makes you feel and how great you're looking. And then eventually what's going to happen is you can praise yourself and you're not going to need other people to praise you on the efforts that you've accomplished. And by praising yourself, you can acknowledge all of the hard work that you put in, and it is going to lead to a more sense of intrinsic motivation. Another thing would be specific positive feedback. By doing specific positive feedback, again, because it's not very general, you have to look at very, very minute details to pinpoint what exactly you are happy with, what exactly you've accomplished, and you're going to be able to get a much better sense of yourself by doing it this way. One of the ways in which you can help with this specific positive feedback would be to keep a notebook. Basically, throughout the entire day, think of all the different statements that you make about yourself or your goals or things that you want to accomplish, and record all the statements that you make about yourself in this book. Then at the end of the day, just go through that notebook and read all of the statements that you've made, and then review the list and determine, are the statements positive statements or are they negative statements? If they are negative statements, why are they negative? What makes them negative? And how exactly can you flip them to turn them into a positive statement? This is going to be very, very beneficial, and this is something that I've done with my clients and also with myself, and it made a tremendous impact on my mental health and also developing a state of intrinsic motivation. One of the reasons why flipping the negative into the positive is going to be very, very beneficial is because if you are constantly finding that you are saying negative things about yourself and you're always feeling down about yourself, by flipping it into a positive, it's going to force you to try and see the positive on that side. And by seeing the positive and by flipping it into a positive statement, this is going to trigger a switch in your mind, and it is going to make it a lot easier in the future to be more and more positive later on. Because if you're constantly in a negative state, this is going to have detrimental effects later on in your life. And by flipping that switch in your mind, later on in life, you will not need external validation or extrinsic motivation in order to accomplish all of your goals, because as you develop more and more intrinsic motivation, you will be able to be self-fulfilled and you will be able to accomplish everything on your own. And if you do not have somebody to help to motivate you, or if you do not have a reward system in place in order to push you to accomplish your goals, then having that intrinsic motivation is going to be all that you need to accomplish your goal, because at that point, you will be doing it for yourself, not for anybody else, and not for any type of reward system. And that is why it is going to be imperative to balance out your intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. But that's pretty much it for today's video. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to smash that like button so I know to make more of these types of videos in the future. And if you're either new to the channel or haven't subscribed yet, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, as I will be uploading new videos every single day. That's it for today's video. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you again tomorrow.